This isn't in the show notes, but are you excited about a possible stretched A350?
Is that a thing? Are we going beyond the 1,000?
It is something that was talked about last week during Airbus's big kind of year in review
annual press conference.
They hinted that it's possible there could be a stretched version of the A350 beyond the 1,000.
Would it be the 1,100 or the 2,000? Or can you really make that aircraft longer? I missed this.
They're going to try, I guess. Yeah, it was just slightly, it was one of those, yeah, we're thinking about it, but we're not seriously there yet.
Maybe. You never know.
There you go. Exactly. You just never know. We'll talk a little bit more about Airbus later in the show. We're going to talk about more engine stuff and production and all that good fun stuff. But first, we're going to start with the snow because there was a lot of it. Oof. Jason, have you dug out yet?
Yes. Actually, it's mostly melted already. This was a very different snow than what we had in January, where we stayed below freezing for like weeks on end. It's above freezing now, which is fantastic, several degrees above zero. But this blizzard, this historic blizzard, man, did it come out of nowhere. And that's why I'm home right now and not on the road recording, in a corporate building's gym or in a closet or something. It got me.
It got you good too. I mean, we're talking multiple iterations of trying to get to Dulles from New York. I think we went through
or just anywhere
18
really
travel arrangements.
Yeah, this one played out weird. Usually with the blizzard, you see it coming and forecasts will tell you, hey, next week something's cooking, and like, hey, 4 days from now, things are going to get pretty snowy. Maybe do something about it. But for the storm was ramping up Sunday afternoon into evening, and Friday night, all the way up until Friday night, the forecast was like, yeah, we're probably going to get a bit of snow. It'll be a few inches or whatever, no big deal. And then everyone woke up Saturday, and apparently all the meteorologists drank some Red Bull or had some coffee, reread some models and said, oh, it's actually going to be an historic blizzard, and it's going to be like multiple feet of snow. And it starts tomorrow. Good luck. So that was a surprise, caught everyone by surprise. Flights in and out of New York, Boston, really everywhere in New England, I'd say, up from Philly all the way up to Maine, were canceled for nearly 2 full days. And then icing on the top, just as everything finally reopened at noon on Tuesday, today, Wednesday morning, we got a bit of a dusting of snow, which was just enough to throw all 3 airports back into chaos because everything that stayed overnight that came in after the blizzard then had to be de-iced to get back out, which when you have to do every airplane at once doesn't go all that well.
No.
But that one, that was a surprise. My original flight was on Monday. It was canceled on me. Obviously, I moved it to Tuesday. That was canceled again. And whenever I go down to Dulles, I also have mirrored Amtrak bookings because you never know. And again, I was booked on the same train consecutively 2 days in a row, and it canceled 2 days in a row. And I just gave up. I tried.
You did your best. You did your best.
I did my best. Amtrak servers did not do their best and went down completely on Monday night. So yeah, what a mess.
Well, let's talk about a different mess. Because while you were trying to get to Washington, D.C. yesterday, Congress was already there. And they were voting, the House specifically, was voting on the Rotor Act. So this was the piece of legislation that had been proposed, bipartisan support coming out of the Senate. So this was Ted Cruz and Mary Cantwell over in the Senate, and they were crafting legislation that would address specific safety recommendations from the NTSB, not only in the wake of the midair collision in Washington, D.C., but also long-standing NTSB safety recommendations. So this was the Rotorcraft Operations, Transparency, and Oversight Reform Act. And this was passed unanimously in the Senate in December. And at the time of its passage, Assistant to the Secretary of War for Public Affairs and Senior Advisor Sean Parnell said, quote, "The Department of War thanks Chairman Cruz, Ranking Member Cantwell, Senator Moran, Senator Marshall, and Senator Duckworth for their leadership on the Rotorcraft Operations, Transparency, and Oversight Reform Act, which would enhance communications to improve aviation safety. The department supports this legislation and appreciates the Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation's continued partnership and dialogue to account for critical national security operations. The department looks forward to continuing the productive dialogue with the committee to finalize the bill and working towards its ultimate passage." That was December 17th.
Fast forward to February 23rd.
On February 24th, Tuesday, the same day the House voted on the bill, the same Sean Parnell said, quote, "The bill would create significant unresolved budgetary burdens and operational security risks affecting national defense activities. Further, the Senate version, quote, does not reflect several of the mutually discussed updates negotiated with the Commerce Committee."
Didn't know the Department of Defense ever really cared about cost concerns, because it's like half of our federal budget. So that's not a legitimate concern on their part. All of a sudden, just flipped on a dime, and suddenly what they were backing, what they said is good legislation and will help prevent future disasters. Suddenly, no, we can't do it because of security concerns. We're not going to tell you about cost concerns that don't really matter.
So what did the Rotor Act require, and why the about face from the Department of Defense? The Rotor Act required the adoption of ADSB in any place that ADSB out was already required, and would create a rulemaking committee to study the feasibility of mandating ADSB in all controlled airspace within the U.S., so even very small airports. As far as the Department of Defense is concerned, the Rotor Act would significantly limit the DoD's ability to operate without active transponders in the national airspace system. So prior to the crash in Washington, D.C., the DoD had been using its exemption from the original ADSB mandate law that allowed the DoD to conduct flights that included sensitive government missions without an active ADSB transponder. The DoD had taken that definition of sensitive government missions and expanded it to training missions and carriage of sub-cabinet level members of government. The Rotor Act removed that exemption, and it also requires that Congress be notified if the more limited exemption that the Rotor Act puts into place is used more than 5 times in a given month. So these are the rules that are actually in place at the moment based on the FAA's emergency powers. So this would have codified the emergency rules that are in place as part of the FAA's ability to make these rules on an emergency basis. The DoD's issue here becomes one of, they claim to have a national security concern, which is interesting given that there are still exemptions within the Rotor Act. It doesn't prevent them from using those exemptions. They just need to notify Congress and say, hey, we're using these exemptions. And they don't need to notify them ahead of time. They just need to notify them within 2 weeks if they use them more than 5 times within a month.
Mere paperwork is all that was.
So that's one of the issues raised by the DoD. Elsewhere, there's the argument that there's a competing bill. Some folks would say it's not a competing bill. It's a companion bill that addresses some of these same issues. So families of the victims of the DC midair collision were in favor of the passage of the Rotor Act, and they wrote a letter to the Senate sponsor, Senator Cruz, saying, quote, while we recognize that additional work remains to fully address all